My name is Dean Phelps. I'm the Director of Product Enhancement here for CDM Plus. And what I wanted to do this afternoon, spend about 20 to 30 minutes really just going over some of the basics of getting started with CDM Plus payroll. I want to go over just some of the basic setup with CDM Plus payroll, what we need to do in accounting to be ready, and want to go over the setup for employees. Specifically, I want to look at the payroll setup for ministers. And with all that said and done, then let's get started. So what you should be seeing now is my desktop with the CDM Plus menu up here at the top. So one of the first places I want to look is at a system preference that is important for your payroll setup. So when you go into system preferences, there are system preferences for payroll. And the important one to check is this box that says post taxes and other deductions to accounts payable. This saves you a step. As we are generating payroll, as we're processing, printing checks or doing direct deposits, and we go to post payroll, then what we want to do is go ahead and create invoices for the liabilities that we create. So whenever we're running a payroll, we're creating liabilities for federal taxes, FICA, state taxes that we've withheld and that have to be paid to the taxing entity. And having this box checked takes a step out of that process, because what we'll do is go ahead and post those liabilities, those deductions and taxes to your accounts payable system. You can then go in and mark those invoices for payment and pay them using accounts payable. So there's an important box to have checked: post taxes and other deductions to accounts payable. The next main setup piece that I want to look at is off of the program menu, and I'll admit to being kind of old school in that I tend to work off of the menus. If you work off the toolbars or off the welcome windows, that's certainly fine too. I'm just, like I say, I'm kind of old school, sort of a menu-driven guy. So off the program menu, there's payroll. One of the first things we're going to need to do is set up the payer record for the church or organization. And by and large, we're just going to have one of these. This is the place where we associate the payrolls that we're running with the tax ID for your church or for your organization. So I'm going to click Show All on my Payer Records window here. You might note I went Program, Payroll, Payer Records. And you'll see that I just have the one payer record for First Community Church in Big City. And so there's a lot of information on this window that is required. Everything that's marked with an asterisk is a required field. So this is where we enter the federal tax ID, the EIN. We need this description, name, address. This is information that will appear on those year-end tax forms, on the W-2s and W-3s. We also need to list any state taxing entities that are involved. So here we have the state of Kentucky listed along with our taxpayer ID for that state, our state tax account for that as well. So the payer record is important to have set up, and you'll see when we get on to employee records, if we needed multiple payer records, that would be a situation where we actually have two separate federal ID numbers. So that's the payer record, an important part of the setup and getting started with CDM Plus payroll. So then let's go take a look at an employee information record and look at how pay items and various things for an employee get set up. So I'll go to Program, Payroll, Employee Information. Here's my employee information window. So I'm going to click to Show All. I'm going to show all of my employees. And rather than set up a new employee, I'm going to show you how we have set up an existing employee. Before I do that, though, let me pull this window off, because there is one other thing I want to show. Is I'm bringing up the chart of accounts. So I'm going to Program, Accounting, Ledger, Chart of Accounts. And what I want to show here is that we really need to have some accounts already set up for payroll. So for example, I'm going to need the liability accounts where when I withhold federal taxes, where is that liability? Where are we going to indicate that we owe that money? And the same thing true for FICA and Medicare, state tax, and any local taxes that may apply. You could certainly do all of this in a single liability account. My preference is to see folks use separate liability accounts like what we have separated here, so that when I'm printing a balance sheet and I have some liability that has not been paid yet, that I'm seeing that broken out by federal, FICA, state, and local. Then we also need expense accounts set up for not only the salary for these various compensation entities. So I might have an expense account for the senior minister's salary. I might also have an expense account for the senior minister's housing. If they're, then see, I've got one there, 5045. I also need an expense account where I'm going to book that FICA and Medicare matching that we do for non-clergy employees. There it is, 5090 is where we've got that. So those are some things that you'll need to set up in your chart of accounts as well. Now let's bring the employee information window back over and look and see how we set up an employee. So we'll look first at William Martin. William Martin, as you can see, is the position of custodian. So this is an employee that is what we term, this is a non-clergy employee of the church. So you see what we've entered for the employee. We do have birth date and social security number in here. So I would recommend that you do take a look in administration and make sure that the folks that have access to payroll and employee information records is limited to only those folks that need it, because we do have personal and sensitive information on these records. An employee ID is required, something that would be unique within your employee records. Title is documentation. It's a free text field. You can indicate when an employee started, when their employment ended. And this is where we link this particular employee to that payer record that we saw earlier as we were setting up. We can also link our employees to address and individual records. I would really recommend that you do this. And I also strongly encourage linking to the individual record as well, because if you're using Engage, and then you can have Engage Payroll, which allows an employee to log into their Engage account and view their payroll history. On the Setup tab, then this is where we show that there is we're going to withhold Kentucky state taxes, but this is where we connect this employee's payroll and withholding calculations to this particular state tax. In this particular example, we have a local tax as well. We enter information from the employee's W-4, so their marital status, the number of allowances both for federal and for state. Auto draw, if we're using direct deposit, this checkbox indicates that this employee does get paid by direct deposit. And whether or not we choose to print a check stub when we're actually in the writing checks window. Pay items is where we set up the compensation information. So again, for William Martin, we have a pay item for his regular hours that is an hourly type. So when we go to calculate his payroll, we're going to need to enter a number of hours. On this particular window, we set what the standard rate is. In this case, it's $12 per hour. And we set what the overtime rate is, which is 1.5 times the standard rate, or $18 per hour. When we go to calculate hourly payroll, then that's where we're going to enter the number of hours that Bill worked in this pay period and calculate his gross pay accordingly. This is also where having information correct in the chart of accounts is important, because the wage and salary information for Bill is going to get booked to this expense account for custodian salary, 5030. Where do we book the matching expense for FICA and Medicare? Well, that's that 5090 account that we saw earlier in the chart of accounts. We also have down here two, I'll call them sub-tabs, one for this pay setup that we're looking at, where we put in the compensation information for Bill, and the taxes and deductions. There's really nothing for Bill that we need to do here. If Bill wanted, say, an extra $15 per pay period withheld for federal taxes, we could do that here. So, for example, I might come in and change and put 15 there, and I'm going to save that. Now, with this set up the way I have it, when we calculate Bill's payroll, we're going to calculate his withholdings according to the tax table, and we're going to add another $15 onto that. So it is possible for employees to request additional withholding, and again, that's on, I'm blanking on whether it's a W-4 or a W-9, where the employee specifies their withholdings. This particular employee is not exempt from federal tax. We do need to include the wages on the W-2, so neither of these boxes, no boxes get checked in either of these columns. I'm going to real quick change Bill back to no additional withholding. And then we can look at any other deductions, say if there is a withholding for a 401k or 403b type of pension plan. If we withhold a portion of the employee's compensation to help cover the cost of health insurance premiums, those get set up on this deductions tab. So while we're here, I want to kind of drop in a footnote, take a little bit of a left turn at Albuquerque, and come down here and again go to Program, Payroll, Deduction Setup. And this is where we would set up those kind of deductions. So again, I'm going to click the Show All button. Let's see all of the deductions that are in here. I specifically want to point out this Lexington tax. You know, look back over here on the setup for Bill Martin and notice that local tax number 1 is associated with this Lexington tax. Well, that is set up here in the deduction setup. So if you have a local tax that's involved, this is how you prepare for it. You assign it the name that will be meaningful to you. This is what you'll see when you drop down that local tax list. Note that this is a local tax type. I'm going to click Change so I can drop these boxes down and see the other types. So I can list other here, but this is a local tax type. I am using the local withholding form for this tax. Here's its account number, and it's a city income tax. Then on the Calculation tab, how does this withholding get calculated? In the case of this tax, it's a flat calculation that is 1.5% of gross. So you would need to consult your local tax authority to know exactly how this calculation should be configured. But this is where you set up deductions for things like a local tax. Again, local taxes. I'm going to cancel out of change mode there. And note that I also might set up a pension deduction. And this is listed as an employer tax in the W-2 field. where does this show up on the W-2, or in this case, it doesn't. Again, I need to have set up on my chart of accounts where these things get booked as I post this payroll into accounting. So let's come back over to the employee information window. Now I want to take a look at Dean Patterson. Dean Patterson is a clergy employee of the church, and this is where I want to talk about some of the particulars of setting up clergy payroll. So let's take a look at Dean Patterson. Again, this is the senior minister. This is a clergy employee of the church. Again, note that we're linked to the individual record here. On his setup, it looks very much the same. Marital status, allowances, Kentucky state tax, Lexington local tax. On the pay items, here's where it starts to get a little different. Ministers have kind of a dual tax status. As far as federal income tax is concerned, they are employees of the church, and so that's why a minister receives Form W-2 and not a 1099 miscellaneous. However, when it comes to Social Security and Medicare, FICA and Medicare, the minister is considered to be self-employed. So the minister pays the FICA and Medicare taxes by filing Form SE. They basically pay self-employment tax. The minister also is allowed to claim a housing allowance. Now, the housing allowance is not subject to federal income tax, but it is subject to FICA and Medicare, so it would be part of that self-employment tax calculation. So that kind of dual tax status is what makes the minister's payroll a little bit different setup. It's I'll even say a little bit trickier setup, although once we kind of understand why we're doing some of these things, then it starts to make sense. Notice here that unlike on Bill Martin, let's go back and look at his real quick. I just had this one pay item set up for him. I've got these 3 pay items set up for Dean Patterson. Let's start by taking a look at pastor's salary. Now note that the type over here, it's not hourly, this is a salaried amount. So down here in pay rate, I don't have the hours. I'm going to put in that standard rate based on this pay frequency. So in this case, pay period is semi-monthly. So the standard rate would be the annual compensation, the annual salary divided by 24. So this is the gross pay, this pay item for this pay period. So again, the annual total, semi-monthly we divide by 24, bi-weekly we divide by 26, weekly we divide by 52. So however that calculation is done, the important thing is that this pay rate is the pay rate for the pay period. Again, we've set up the items we saw in the chart of accounts, account number 5000 for the minister's salary, 5090 for the FICA and Medicare matching. Coming back to the pastor's salary, we've covered the rate, the account numbers involved. Again, I'm going to come over here to the taxes and deductions, and we're going to see something that we did not see on Bill Martin's. Remember I said, I think I said, I may not have, the minister is considered an employee as far as federal income tax is concerned, but the minister's federal income tax is not subject to withholding. A lot of ministers file quarterly estimated taxes. So what we've done here is we've marked that Pastor Patterson's salary, again, this pay item, is exempt from federal income tax. It's exempt from a FICA and Medicare withholding. It's exempt from a state withholding and exempt from local tax withholding. Now note that I have the exclude from W-2 boxes unchecked. I do need to show the minister's salary in box 1 on the W-2 and in the state line on the W-2 as well. This is where we're saying it's exempt from the withholding, but I do need to show that total in box 1 and on the state line on the W-2. So I want to come back over. Let's look at now the pay item of the pastor's housing allowance. This is where we've indicated that the type is allowance. What that does is that opens up some other boxes here on the pay setup window. So again, it's housing. We use the same pay frequency for the housing allowance. You don't have to, but it's certainly easier to use the same pay frequency and write one check. Again, the rate would be the annual amount broken out over the pay period. So in this case, it's the annual amount divided by 24 because it's semi-monthly. What expense account number does this get booked to? There is no employer matching on this, so these account numbers don't matter. What is important here is that we do tell the system correctly what W-2 box to report this in. So this is kind of getting to that question of, should I pay the housing allowance out of payroll rather than accounts payable? This is exactly why. Because now here I'm saying that this pay item gets reported in box 14 on the W-2, and it gets this description, housing. So I would recommend, this is a free text field. I would keep this short because of space constraints in the box, but it does need to clearly indicate that this is a housing allowance. The taxes and deductions for this also looks a little different. Again, for the housing allowance, we do not show the housing allowance in box 1 or on the state income line on the W-2, and it shows up in box 14. So not only are we exempt from all the withholdings for the housing allowance, but we also do not show those in box 1 or on the state income line on the W-2. Again, I can set up deductions. In this case, we have a fixed pension deduction for a 403B or 401K type of plan. And so we book that against 25, to this accounts payable account. And again, because we checked that box way back at the beginning of the session when I showed you the box on system preferences, because I had that box checked, whenever I post payroll, I'm going to post this liability into accounts payable. So it comes time to actually send that on to the denominational pension fund. I'm able to mark those invoices for payment and cut the check. Oh, Sheila, did I answer the fixed payroll? No, I did not. Thank you so much. Over here on there's two things I need to do. So I'm going to set up Dean Patterson to have actually a fixed amount withheld on his salary. I'm going to go to taxes and deductions. So what I need to do to make this work is I need to uncheck the box that says his salary, this pay item, is exempt from federal tax. And he wants us to withhold a fixed $200 per pay period for federal tax. Now, because I've unchecked this box, if I just leave this where it is, what CDM Plus will do is go to the tax table, calculate a withholding, and then add the $200 to it. Well, that's not what Pastor Patterson wants us to do. He just wants a fixed $200 withholding every month. So I need to come over here to the Liabilities tab, and on this federal tax liability, check this box that says Use Entered Amounts Only. So this box says, okay, don't go to the tax table and do the calculation and then add the $200 on it. Just do the $200 withholding. So you need to do these two things in combination. Uncheck, if it's checked for this particular tax item, uncheck it, enter an add-on amount, and then come over to the Liabilities tab and check the box that says Use Entered Amounts Only. That, I'm going to save all of it. And now Pastor Patterson is set up to have that $200 withholding. Again, when I calculate the payroll. So just for an example, I'm going to calculate the payroll from 12/1, 12/15 with a paid date of today. And once we've calculated, I'm going to view payroll. Notice I had the calculation in there for, this is semi-monthly, so I'm going to have 80 hours. 80 hours. Now we're calculating the hourly payroll. And then what I asked CDM Plus to do after I was done was open the View Payroll window. Well, there's the payroll that we just calculated for Dean Patterson. And note, we withheld a flat $200. That covers everything I had hoped to cover and then some. So again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being users of CDM Plus. Again, don't hesitate to call the support number or send an email to support@cdmplus.com and let us help you as we get into some of these important year-end tasks.